On the Amtrak through the Montana snowstorm, Arthur handed me my thermos. "Rest now, Ellie. The lavender tea will help you sleep," he said, his eyes filled with a tenderness that felt like a lie. As my eyelids grew heavy, the rhythm of the tracks turned into a dull roar. Arthur leaned in, his breath cold against my ear. "In an hour, Eleanor Vance will be dead. Only a nameless Maria Sanchez will wake up in the storm." I tried to scream, but the world vanished. Then a man gripped my hand. "Ellie? My God, is that you after 30 years? 30 years. It's a lifetime when you're building something from the dirt up. I remember the very first winter at the Vance Ranch, when the wind whistled through the gaps in the barn like a dying ghost. I had one old loom, 2 alpacas, and a heart full of stubborn pride. Back then, my hands were never clean. They were stained with dark dyes, calloused from the rough fibers, and always, always freezing. But I didn't mind. I was weaving a future. Every stitch, every yard of fabric was a brick in the empire I was building for my family. I worked until my back ached and my eyes burned under the dim light of a kerosene lamp, dreaming of a legacy that would last. Now, Vance Weaving is the heartbeat of this entire valley. We provide for 50 families. We ship our blankets and wool to the finest boutiques across the country. I know every machine by its specific hum. I know every weaver by their first name and the stories of their children. I built this legacy stitch by stitch while the sun rose over the snow-capped peaks of Montana and the rest of the world was still asleep. Everything was in my name. The land, the mill, the car, the house. I was the engine that kept us moving, and I thought Arthur was my anchor. Arthur Vance, my husband, my elegant, polished manager. To the people in town, he was the sophisticated face of the business. He always wore the most expensive wool suits, the ones I made with my own hands. He had that smooth, effortless way of talking to the bankers and the big city clients that made them feel important. While I was on the factory floor, covered in dust and grease and the smell of raw wool, Arthur was in the front office with his polished leather shoes and his heavy mahogany desk. He looked like success. He smelled like success. But a fine suit can hide a lot of rot. In 30 years, Arthur's management of the accounts had never once turned a profit. Not a single year. Or he'd come home late with stories of market fluctuations and unforeseen investments, his voice dripping with that practiced, gentle concern. "Don't worry, Ellie," he'd say. "I'll handle the numbers. You just keep making the magic happen in the mill." And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Marriage is a partnership, isn't it? You carry the weight together. If he was weak with money, I was kong enough to cover for Kakwa Chungta, or so I thought. But I was blind. I was so busy detnin hung tam them jepja that I didn't see the threads he was pulling apart behind my back. While I was worrying Vichat Luang Kwa Soy and the happiness of our weavers, Arthur was drowning in a sea of secrets, massive debts, gambling losses that would make a sane man's heart stop. He wasn't just losing money. He was losing my money. And he was gambling away our employees' security and our children's future. He didn't just feel bad about his failures, he hated me for my success. I saw no joy key in the split second before he put on his loving husband mask, a flash of cold, sharp envy in his eyes, kimot kach hang kangoi tamhin kuatoy. A tightening of his jaw, ki anta faisin chuki kuatoy, on a check to cover his latest mistake. He didn't want to be my partner. He wanted to be the king of a castle he never laid a single brick for. He was a parasite, feeding on the life I had built, waiting for the moment I was weak enough to be replaced. I remember the early days at the local trade fairs. Jung duoi kon mua bang jia, ko gang ban hung, che kon kwang ko jiao tien kwa min chobat, ki ai muan lang nang hi. Arthur would stay in the truck. Solamungkwa mi bilambun, tuiliranen biat jiu jaw. Tuiliranen thairang antayu vehaun hoang kwaket kwan hungketsu tu rap kwa kwatrin. Anta yukai dan tien kwa mot nguain havansi. Nhong anta hong ko shoot ton trong now joy voilen. Joy voy anta suong det chila motai kwan gan hang ma anta hong bao gioko de lap jai. Anta dung su kuyen ru kwa min han hu mot vuki. Mo chiek gang tai in hung bok lai mot bantai luon vuana raje joy hoin hio hon. Ba moi nam. Toi jan trao cho anta ba moi nam kuok joy. Kong vx, vasutin tuong toyet joy kuamin. Toyang hi ma jang bao vian tabang, kach gan kvats gan hnang. Toyang hi ma jang klamot ngoi votot bang kash, vot lon hung dong ke jotrong sokai. Nung ban kong the det mot tamba ben chak bang sui chi mak nat. Toi jang she dong mo jechitren nintang kuan hung loi noi doi. Va Arthur chi jang joy bao tuyet huan, how abjen je jay toi vao bong toi. Anta kong chi muon toi roi ji, anta muon toi bien mat, anta muon soa sashangoi fu nuja kian, anta kam thein hobe, va chiem leitat kan hungiko ai tung cham vaiso. The wind was howling through the eaves of the Vance Ranch that morning, a sharp, bitter reminder that winter in Montana never plays fair. I was in our bedroom pulling my heavy suitcases across the floor. 30 years of marriage, and I still knew exactly how Arthur liked his shirts folded, exactly where he kept his cufflinks, exactly how he wanted the house to look before we left for a trip. My mother had just been sent home from the hospital after a scare with her heart, and Arthur had been the one to insist I go. "Do you need a break, Ellie?" he had said, his voice as smooth as the silk linings of the suits I made for him. "Go see her, spend a few days in the valley. I'll handle the mill." I believed him. I always believed him. Then my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Tess. "Mom, are you alone?" Her voice was sharp, a professional edge she usually saved for the courtroom. My daughter, the prosecutor. She had always been the one to spot the rot in the wood before the house started to lean. "I'm packing, Tess. The train leaves in 2 hours. What is it?" "It's about Dad, Mom, and Clara, that auditor he brought in from the city. I've been doing some digging into the Vance accounts. Things aren't adding up. Large sums of money are moving into offshore accounts I've never seen before. And Mom, I saw them, yesterday in town. They were in his car. I parked behind the old warehouse. They weren't looking at ledgers." I felt a sudden, sharp coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the Montana wind. "Tess, stop it. How dare you? 30 years. 30 years I have built this empire with your father by my side. Every brick in that mill, every bale of wool, we did it together. You've never liked him. Not since you were 16 and you came home with those lies about the mall. I won't have it. Not today. It wasn't a lie then, and it isn't a lie now. He's a parasite, Mom. He's drowning in gambling debt, and Clara is helping him siphon the mill dry. If you go on that trip, you're giving him exactly what he wants, a clear path to take everything you've built." "Enough!" I screamed into the phone, my voice shaking the quiet of the room. "He is my husband. He is my anchor. You are just like your grandmother, always looking for a ghost in the closet. I'm hanging up now, Tess. Don't call me again until you can respect this family." I cut the call. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I looked at my reflection in the vanity mirror. I saw the lines around my eyes, the silver in my hair. 30 years of hard work. 30 years of being the queen of Montana wool. I had built a legacy from 2 alpacas and a hand loom. I couldn't accept that the man I loved was the one holding the match to burn it all down. It was easier to be angry at my daughter than to be afraid of my husband. But Tess, she wouldn't stay away. An hour before I had to leave for the station, she pulled up to the ranch in a cloud of dust. She didn't yell. She didn't apologize. When she walked into the house with her head held high and a small sewing kit in her hand, Arthur was out in the barn loading the last of my bags. "I'm not here to fight, Mom," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I just want you to take your silver alpaca coat, the one you finished last month. The wind is going to be brutal on the crossing." She took the coat from the closet. My masterpiece. The wool was so fine it felt like water in your hands, a shimmering silver that caught the light of the winter sun. She sat on the edge of the bed and spread it across her lap. "The lining is loose near the hem," she whispered, not looking at me. I watched her. Her hands were trembling, but her needle was steady. Needle, thread, needle, thread. She wasn't just fixing a seam, she was frantic. I'd her eyes darting toward the door as if she expected Arthur to burst in at any moment. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny, hard object, no bigger than a button. It was a GPS tracker. A high-end military-grade device she probably got from one of her contacts at the precinct. I opened my mouth to protest, to tell her she was being paranoid, but the look on her face stopped me. It was pure, unadulterated terror. For me. Shikau no sao vau ben trong lop lot vai alpeka, ngai sao kai nhan mangten toi. Muikau qua comberat nyo, gan nu vo hing. No bien matuan toan vau trong lop vai lot dai dain. There. It's done, she said, biting off the thread. She helped me into the coat. The weight of it felt different now, heavier, like a suit of armor I didn't know I needed. She hugged me then, a desperate, crushing hug that smelled like her perfume and the cold air outside. "I love you, Mom. Please, just keep the coat on. Don't take it off until you get to Grandma's. Promise me." "I promise, honey. You're being dramatic. But I promise." I brushed her hair back, still feeling that stubborn pride, that blind loyalty to the man waiting for me in the driveway. I didn't see the tears in her eyes. I didn't see the way she looked at her father when he walked in to grab my hand. "Ready, my love?" Arthur asked, his smile as perfect as ever. "Ready," I replied. If I had only known. If I had only felt the tiny, hard lump against my side as I walked to the car, I would have realized that my daughter wasn't my enemy. She was the only one who knew that in less than 3 hours, my husband was going to try and erase me from the world. And I walked out into the snow, wrapped in my silver wool, carrying the only thing that was going to bring me back home. The Whitefish station was a ghost of its summer self, snow piled high against the platform, a relentless Montana winter trying to bury the tracks. Arthur held my hand, his leather glove firm and warm against mine. "You're shivering, Ellie," he said, his breath blooming in the frozen air. "Let's get you settled before the train arrives." We sat in the small waiting area, the old heater humming, but I couldn't stop the trembling. Maybe it was the cold, or maybe it was Tess's voice still ringing in my head, a warning I had chosen to drown out with loyalty. Arthur kept checking his watch, every 2 minutes. He was acting strange, restless, like a man waiting for a race to begin. "I have a surprise for the crossing," he whispered, reaching into his bag. He pulled out our family thermos. "Lavender and honey, your favorite. I brewed it myself this morning to help you sleep through the mountains." I looked at him, surprised. Arthur never made tea. In 30 years, he'd barely touched a kettle in our kitchen, but I wanted to believe it was a peace offering. I wanted to believe my daughter was wrong about the man I'd loved for half my life. I took the thermos. It was warm, the steam smelling like the summer fields behind our mill. I took a sip. It was sweet, almost too sweet, with a strange metallic tang at the end, like the taste of a copper coin. "It tastes different, Arthur," I said. He watched me, his eyes never leaving my face. "It's a special blend, my love. Drink up. It'll settle your nerves for the journey." I took another sip, and another. He didn't look away. Not once. It was an intensity I'd never seen before, like a predator watching the trap spring. The world started to tilt. The announcements over the PA system began to sound like they were coming from underwater, distorted and far away. The silver alpaca coat, the masterpiece I'd spent months date, suddenly felt 10 times heavier, dragging me down toward the floor. "Arthur, my head. I feel so dizzy," I managed to say. My tongue felt like lead in my mouth. My vision began to blur, the snowy tracks outside turning into a smear of gray and white. "It's just the stress, Ellie. The altitude. I've got you." He stood up and pulled me to my feet. I couldn't feel my legs. They were useless, heavy, like I was trying to walk through deep mud. Mahi practically carried me toward the platform. The Amtrak train roared as it pulled in, a giant metal beast screaming into the night. I tried to focus on the conductor, to yell, to tell someone I wasn't okay, but no sound came out, only a soft, broken whimper. Arthur led me to a private cabin at the very back of the train. The conductor looked at us for a split second, but Arthur just flashed his perfect, charming manager's smile. "My wife has a severe migraine," he said. "She needs absolute quiet." He laid me down on the narrow bunk. I could see him, but it was like looking through a thick, frosted window. The mask was gone. The tender husband I'd known for 3 decades had disappeared, replaced by a man with eyes as cold as a Montana blizzard. He reached down and unzipped my purse. He took out my phone, my wallet. Then he even took the small locket I wore around my neck, the one with Julian and Tessa's pictures inside. My identity. He was peeling it away, layer by layer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a new wallet, a cheap plastic thing. He tucked it into my coat pocket. "Maria Sanchez," he whispered, his voice a blade in the dark. "That's who you are now, Ellie, a nameless, broken woman on a one-way trip to nowhere." I tried to reach for him, to grab his coat, to beg him to stop, but my body wouldn't obey. I was trapped inside a shell that refused to move. He looked at me one last time. No love, no regret, just a chilling, calculated victory. "In an hour, you won't even remember your own children's names," he said. He stepped out and closed the heavy door. I heard the lock click. The train jolted, the wheels beginning to grind against the iron, starting our long journey south. I tried to reach for the hem of the silver coat, the place where Tess had Kau Kai Jin Vivao, but I was slipping away. The world went black. The last thing I heard was the lonely whistle of the train, echoing through the mountains, carrying me into a life that wasn't mine. Arthur didn't just walk away. He stayed for the final act, standing over me while the cabin lights flickered against the frost on the window. I was trapped in that terrifying space between wakefulness and sleep, my mind screaming but my fingers refusing to twitch. I could hear everything: the rustle of silk, the click of a zipper, the slow, methodical breath of a man who was tidying up a crime. He reached for my handbag, the one made from the softest leather, on a gift he'd given me for our 25th anniversary. He didn't handle it with care. He ripped it open, searching for the pieces of who I was. I heard the snap of my driver's license being pulled from its slot. Eleanor Vance, the name that meant something in every corner of this state. He stared at it for a long beat, his thumb tracing my photo, and then he dropped it into his own pocket. Then came the credit cards, the business cards, the membership to the Weaving Guild. One by one, he was stripping me of my history. He was unweaving me. He didn't stop there. I felt his cold-gloved hand reach for my neck. He unclasped the gold locket I never took off, the one that held the tiny, grain-sized photos of Tess and Julian. He didn't even hesitate. He tucked it away like it was a piece of trash he was clearing from a table. And he wanted me to be a ghost. He wanted me to be a blank page that the world would never know how to read. Arthur leaned down, his face so close I could smell the honey from the tea on his breath. "You see, Ellie, it's not enough for you to be gone. You have to be erased. If they found Eleanor Vance on a train in the middle of nowhere, they'd call the papers, they'd call the lawyers, they'd call our children. But if they find a nameless woman, a Jane Doe with no past and a confused mind, they'll just turn their heads. You'll be a statistic, a tragedy in a faded coat, wandering through a city that doesn't know your name." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a cheap, blue plastic wallet. I heard him slide it into the side pocket of my silver alpaca coat. He didn't just want me to lose my name. He wanted to give me a new one, a fake one, Maria Sanchez. He had it all planned out. Many people ask, why wouldn't he just leave my things? Why go through the trouble of stealing a woman's wallet? Because Arthur was a professional parasite. He knew the logic of the system. In Montana or Nebraska or wherever this train was taking me, a woman without an ID is a woman without a voice. Without a plastic card, I couldn't check into a hotel. I couldn't buy a plane ticket home. I couldn't walk into a police station and prove that I owned a multi-million-dollar weaving mill. To the world, I would just be a runaway or a vagrant. I would be a person who didn't exist. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He wasn't just taking my money, he was taking my ability to fight back. He was ensuring that even if the drug didn't destroy my brain, or the society I built would reject me because I couldn't prove who I was, he was tossing me into the gears of the world, knowing they would crush anyone without a name. Maria Sanchez, he whispered again, a chilling, calculated victory in his tone. She's a simple woman, Ellie. A woman who doesn't own a ranch. A woman who doesn't have a daughter who's a prosecutor. She's nobody, and nobody is going to come looking for her. I felt him pull the wedding ring from my finger. It had been there for 30 years. My skin felt raw, exposed, as the gold slid over my knuckle for the last time. He didn't even look at it. He just dropped it into his pocket with the rest of my life. He was clearing the board. He was making sure that when he walked into that courtroom in 3 days to claim my empire, there wouldn't be a single thread left connecting me to the woman who built it. He looked at me one last time, his eyes as hollow as the mountain tunnels we were about to pass through. There was no love left, no regret, just the cold, sharp efficiency of a man who had finally won. "Goodbye, Eleanor," he said, his voice flat. "Sleep well. Maria." The door clicked shut. The lock turned with a final, heavy thud. I was alone in the dark, wrapped in the silver wool of my own masterpiece, while my name was being carried away in the pocket of a stranger. I tried to scream. I tried to move. But the darkness was too heavy. I was slipping into the whiteout of the storm, becoming the nobody he wanted me to be. The train jolted, the wheels grinding against the iron, carrying a ghost south toward a life that wasn't hers. Everything I was, everything I had worked for, was being erased by the man I had loved for 30 years. I was Eleanor Vance, but as the train whistled into the night, even I started to wonder, who was Maria Sanchez? I woke up on the freezing floor of a restroom at a lonely train stop somewhere near the border of Idaho. Or maybe it was a wooden bench. Everything was gray. Everything was frozen. I couldn't remember how I got there. I couldn't even remember my own name. I just felt the heavy, cold weight of my silver alpaca coat dragging me down like a lead shroud. A woman's voice pierced the fog, screaming for help. "Someone! This woman is dying! Call 911. Voices began to swirl around me like a Montana blizzard, distorted and terrifying. I felt hands on my neck, checking for a pulse. I felt the sharp, brutal bite of the mountain air hitting my skin. I realized in a moment of sheer drug-induced terror that I was going to die in a place without a name. I was going to die as a woman without a face. And then I heard a voice. "I'm a doctor. Let me through, please." It was firm. It was calm. It was a voice that commanded the chaos to stop. I felt strong, gentle fingers lift my eyelids, a light flashing into my pupils. I heard him rummaging through the pockets of my silver coat, his breath hitching as he searched for a wallet, a phone, anything to tell him who I was. But Arthur had been thorough. Arthur had stripped me of my soul before he threw me away. "No identification. Suspected acute poisoning," he muttered to someone. And then he stopped. He went completely still. I felt his hand brush against the silk label Hao Ben Trong Chik Au Kwa Toi, the one where Tess had hidden the tracker, but he wasn't looking for the device. He was staring at the embroidered name on the tag, Eleanor Vance. Eleanor? The voice changed instantly. The professional distance vanished, replaced by a shock so deep it vibrated through his fingertips. "Eleanor, is that you? My God. Ellie, is it really you?" I tried to focus. A blurry face appeared above mine. Gray hair, brown eyes filled with a mixture of horror and recognition. A face that felt like a half-forgotten dream from a different life. Silas. Dr. Silas Thorne. I remember 30 years ago. I was young then, full of fire and a stubborn kind of strength. I was hiking near the rugged peaks of the Blackfoot River when I found a boy sitting under a towering pine tree. He was 10, maybe 11. His clothes were torn, and his face was streaked with dirt and dried tears. He had been lost in those woods for 2 days. He was terrified of the dark, terrified of the mountain lions, terrified that he would never see his mother again. I sat with him for hours. I gave him my water and the last of my bread. And when the sun began to set and it was time to lead him out, I reached into my bag and pulled out my father's old brass compass. "Take this, Silas," I told him that night, my voice steady for his sake. "The needle always points home. As long as you have this in your hand, you are never truly lost." I saved him that day. I gave a scared boy his life back. We went our separate ways after that. He went to medical school and became a brilliant surgeon. I built a weaving empire. 30 years of silence followed, 30 years of living entirely separate lives. But Silas Thorne never forgot. He reached into his own pocket now, his fingers trembling as he pulled out a small, tarnished brass object. The compass. My father's compass. He had carried it every single day for 3 decades. He told me later that he kept it as a reminder that there is always a way back from the dark, that even in the middle of a storm, someone might come to find you. "I found you, Ellie," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I've got you now. You're not going to vanish. Not while I'm standing here." He started shouting orders with the authority of a man who had done this for a lifetime. "Acute poisoning. I suspect an amnesic sedative. Probably a benzodiazepine or scopolamine. We need a gastric lavage and activated charcoal now." He stayed on the dirty floor with me, his expensive wool suit ruined by the slush and the grime of the rest stop. He didn't care. He held my hand so tight I could feel his own pulse racing against mine. It was the first time in 30 years I felt truly safe. I had saved a lost boy in the woods, and now that boy had returned as an angel in a white coat, pulling me back from the edge of the abyss. Arthur thought he had the perfect crime. Arthur thought he could throw me into the mountains like a piece of old cloth. But he forgot one thing. He forgot about the seeds of kindness I had planted 30 years ago. He forgot that the universe has a way of paying its debts when you least expect it. Silas didn't let go of my hand when the paramedics arrived to lift me onto the stretcher. He didn't let go when the sirens started to wail, cutting through the Montana night. And he looked at me, his eyes full of a loyalty that had waited a lifetime to be proven. "Stay with me, Ellie. Look at the needle. It's pointing home. I'm taking you home." The last thing I saw before the world went black again was his face, the boy I had rescued, now rescuing me back. Silas Thorne saved me twice that night, once as a doctor and once as the friend I should have never let go. The silver coat was stained, my mind was a fractured mess, but as the ambulance sped through the dark, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't Maria Sanchez. I was Eleanor Vance, and I was coming back for everything that was stolen. I opened my eyes to a white ceiling. So much white. It was blinding, sterile, and cold. For a moment, I didn't remember anything. Not the train, not the tea, not the whisper in my ear. For a moment, I just existed in a void. A person without a history, a soul without a name. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of a machine and the faint, distant hum of a hospital hallway. I tried to speak, to ask where I was, but my throat felt like it was filled with Montana dust. I turned my head slowly, and there he was, Silas. He was sitting in a plastic chair next to my bed, his head resting in his hands. He looked like he hadn't slept in a century. When he heard me move, he sat up instantly, his brown eyes flooding with a relief that was almost painful to look at. "Eleanor," he whispered. The name felt heavy. It sounded like music, but I didn't recognize the song. I looked at him, my heart racing against the monitor. "Who is Eleanor?" I asked. My own voice sounded like a stranger's, thin and broken. The panic hit me then. It was a physical blow to the chest, and I searched my mind for a face, a house, a memory of a child's laugh, and I found nothing but a thick, gray fog. I tried to reach for my life, and my hands came back empty. Arthur's poison had done its work. He hadn't just tried to kill my body, he had tried to execute my soul. Silas moved closer, taking my hand in both of his. His grip was warm, steady, a tether to a world I couldn't see anymore. "Don't fight the fog, Ellie," he said softly. "It's the drug. It's trying to hide you from yourself. But it's not strong enough. I won't let it be strong enough." He reached into a small bag on the nightstand and pulled out a scrap of fabric. It was undyed alpaca wool, a small remnant from my own mill. He placed it in my palm and closed my fingers over it. "Don't try to remember your name with your brain, Ellie. Your brain is tired. Remember it with your hands. You've spent 30 years at Nenhung Jiakmo. Feel the fibers." I closed my eyes. I let my fingertips trace the natural crimp of the wool, the specific tight twist of the yarn. Suddenly, a flash of color hit my mind. A sunset over a Thung Lung Tuyet, the sound of a wooden loom clacking in the morning quiet, the smell of raw wool and cedar wood. I knew this. This wasn't a fact I had learned. It was a part of who I was. It was an emotional fingerprint that the drug couldn't touch. Silas watched me, a sad, determined smile on his face. "You see? He thought he was so smart. Arthur thought he could delete you like a line of code because he took your ID and your credit cards. He thought Eleanor Vance was just a collection of plastic cards and a wedding ring. But he was wrong." Silas held up my father's old brass compass. The needle was shaking, but it was pointing true. "In science, we call this the paradox of memory. Data is easy to erase, but impact is permanent. Arthur took your data, Ellie, but he couldn't take the way you saved a lost boy in the woods 30 years ago. He couldn't take the strength you khu vau tung tam tham. He stole your past, but he forgot that your identity isn't just in your head. It's in the lives of everyone you've ever touched." I felt a tear slip down my cheek, carving a path through the numbness. I remembered the coldness of Arthur's breath in my ear. I remembered the silver coat. I remembered Tess, my daughter. Tess. The name burst through the fog like a flare in the night. "Tess!" I gasped. Silas squeezed my hand so tight it hurt. "Yes!" Tess is here, Ellie. She's at the precinct with Sonia. They're building the case. They're coming for him." I looked at the fake wallet sitting on the table, the one with the name Maria Sanchez printed on a cheap card. Arthur wanted me to be a ghost, a nameless tragedy wandering through a city that didn't know I existed. He wanted to toss me into the gears of the world, knowing they would crush anyone without a name. But he made a mistake. He forgot that a queen doesn't need a crown to be recognized by her people. The fear began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp fire, a Montana winter fire. I wasn't an empty shell. I wasn't Maria Sanchez. I was Eleanor Vance, and I had a legacy to protect. "Silas," I said, my voice growing firmer with every breath, "tell me what Sonia found. Tell me about Arthur's debts. I want to know exactly how he tried to destroy me so I can know exactly how to destroy him." Silas leaned back, the shadow of the 10-year-old boy I had saved finally vanishing from his eyes, replaced by the man who was now my guardian. "He thought it was the perfect crime, Ellie. He forgot that the needle always points home, and you're almost home." I stared at the white ceiling again, but it didn't look like a void anymore. It looked like a blank canvas, and I was going to dead a story of justice on it that Arthur Vance would never forget, as long as he lived. The hospital room was quiet. Too quiet, save for the rhythmic, lonely beeping of the heart monitor. I was sitting up, the silver alpaca coat draped over the foot of the bed like a silent witness. Tess was standing by the window, and her silhouette sharp against the gray Montana sky. She was holding a thick manila folder, her knuckles white. Silas sat in the corner, his head down, giving us space. I could feel it in the air. The storm hadn't passed. It was just getting started. "Mom," Tess said, her voice tight. "Sonia and we finished going through Dad's phone and his computer at the mill. Tell me, Tess. I've survived the tea. I've survived the train. I can survive the truth." She walked over and laid the folder on my lap. I opened it. At first, it was just numbers, thousands of dollars flowing out of the Vance accounts, transfers to Clara, payments to a gambling ring in Vegas. But then, I saw the messages. I saw a name that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. Julian. My son. My firstborn. I read the texts, my hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. Julian had known. For over a year, he had known about Arthur and Clara. He had seen them together at the lodge. He had seen the red lines in the ledgers. And he didn't say a word to me, not one. "Julian," I whispered, the name tasting like ash. "Why, Tess? Why would he do this to me?" "Because Arthur bought him, Mom. Look at the dates." I looked. Every time Julian suspected something, a large deposit hit his personal account. A new truck. A down payment on that condo in Missoula. Arthur was using my hard-earned money to buy our son's soul. He was paying him to be an accomplice in my destruction. But it got worse. Much worse. Tess pulled out a recording, a bugged call Sonia had intercepted 2 days after I disappeared on that train. She pressed play. Julian's voice filled the room, sounding cold, detached, like a man discussing a business transaction instead of his own mother. "Dad, did she suspect anything before she got on the train?" Julian asked. "Don't worry," Arthur's voice replied, smooth as silk. "She didn't suspect a thing. She went into the dark thinking I was her anchor." "Is the paperwork ready?" Julian continued. "The lawyers are asking questions about the mill's ownership. We need her declared missing by the end of the week." "It's being handled, son. Just remember what we discussed. Your share of the estate increases the moment she's officially out of the picture." I threw up. Right there, in the hospital basin. It wasn't the lingering effects of the scopolamine. It was the sheer, brutal weight of the betrayal. I had carried that boy. I had nursed him. I had worked 18-hour days at the loom so he would never know the cold I felt during those first Montana winters. I thought I was building a 2M Bang Thep, a home of strength for him. But I realize now that I had built a cage of gold that had rotted him from the inside out. I looked back at the folder. At the very bottom was a legal petition. It was a request to the court to declare Eleanor Vance legally missing and mentally incapacitated. It claimed I had suffered a mental breakdown and fled the state. It asked for Arthur to be given full power of attorney over all my assets. And there, at the bottom of the page, was the witness signature, Julian Vance. My own son had signed my death warrant. He wasn't just staying quiet. He was actively helping his father bury me alive. Now he was willing to let me rot in a nameless facility or wander the streets as Maria Sanchez, all so he could keep his share of a business I built with my own sweat and blood. "I was so blind, Tess," I cried, the tears finally breaking through. "I was too busy building the empire to see the monsters growing inside my own house. I outsourced my son's heart to a man who didn't have one." "You didn't know, Mom," Tess said, gripping my shoulder. "You trusted your family. There's nothing wrong with that." "There is everything wrong with it when it almost costs you your life." I looked at the signature again. Julian's handwriting. The same loops and curves I had taught him when he was 6 years old. He had used the hands I gave him to sign away my existence. The fan began to boil, a cold Montana fire that scorched the grief. Arthur thought he had erased me. Julian thought he had replaced me. They both forgot that you don't build a legacy by being weak. I looked at Silas, then at Tess, my daughter, the one I had called a liar to protect a ghost. She was the only one who had never left my side. "Tess," I said, my voice turning to stone, When is that hearing? Thursday, 2 p.m. at the county courthouse. Fine. Tell Sonia we're not just going to that hearing. We're going to an execution. I'm going to walk into that room and I'm going to show my son exactly what happens when you try to unweave the woman who made you. I closed the folder. The grief was still there, a jagged hole in my heart, but the fire was stronger. I had spent 30 years making the finest wool in the world. Now I was going to use those same threads to hang the men who tried to kill me. Arthur wanted a missing person. Julian wanted an estate. I was going to give them both exactly what they deserved: justice. I sat there staring at the sterile white walls of that hospital room, while the weight of Julian's signature pressed down on my chest like a mountain of lead. How did we get here, I thought? How did the boy I carried, the boy whose every fever I stayed up to soothe, become the man who would help bury me alive for a condo and a truck? I spent 30 years det nen swong det Vance. I was so proud of the steel nest I had built for my children. I wanted them to have everything I never had. I grew up in the dirt, with frost on my blankets and nothing but a stubborn will to survive. I didn't want Julian to ever feel that cold. I didn't want him to ever have to fight for a scrap of bread or a place to sleep. So, I paved his path with silver. I bought him his first car. I paid for his expensive schools. I gave him a vice president title before he even knew how to thread a loom. But that was my greatest mistake. In my rush to protect him, I took Jotji Swong Song Kua No. I built him a world without consequences, a world where every mistake could be erased with a check. I thought I was being a good mother by making his life easy, but I was actually making him weak. I was raising a man who didn't know the difference between value and price. Julian didn't see the Shuang dead as a legacy of hard work. He saw it as a never-ending bank account. While I was on the factory floor covered in wool dust and sweat, Arthur was taking Julian to business lunches that were actually trysts with Clara. Arthur was teaching him that loyalty is just a transaction. Then he gave him money to keep quiet, money to look the other way, money to be an accomplice. And Julian accepted it, because I had never taught him how to say no to comfort. I had outsourced my son's education to the wrong man, thinking that Arthur's polish was what Julian needed to lead. Tess was different. I was always harder on her. I made her work the looms. I made her earn every cent. And I realize now, with a clarity that burns worse than the poison, that my harshness was what saved her. Tess had to see the world as it really was, rough, unforgiving, and real. She learned that a house is only as strong as the people inside it. Julian. He just learned how to sign his name to things he didn't build. I realized then that a true to-am bang thep isn't built with money. It's built with truth. And I gave my son a cage of gold and called it a home. And then I wondered why he turned into a monster when the gold started to run thin. He sold me out for a monthly allowance. He signed my name to a lie because he was too cowardly to stand up for the woman who gave him life. The blame wasn't just on Arthur. It was on me. I was so busy building the empire that I forgot to check the foundation of my own son's heart. I let him grow up in the shadows of my success, blinded by the luxury I provided, until he couldn't see the mother standing right in front of him. Julian thought he was clever, signing those papers. He thought he was taking his inheritance early, but he didn't realize that without a name, without honor, he's just as homeless as he wanted me to be. He's a Jane Doe of character, wandering through a life that has no meaning. And I looked at Silas, then at Tess, the two people who were here not because of my money, but because of my soul. Silas, the boy I saved for nothing in return. Tess, the daughter I pushed away who still came back to save me. They were the threads that held my world together. Julian. He was a knot that needed to be cut. Arthur might have given me the tea, but I was the one who brewed the environment that allowed my son to turn against me. I won't make that mistake again. Thursday is coming. And when I walk into that courtroom, I'm not just going to face my husband, I'm going to face the result of my own failure. I'm going to show Julian that a mother's love is a powerful thing. But a mother's justice is a force of nature. The air in that hospital room was no longer thick with the smell of antiseptic and fear. It was thick with the smell of a brewing storm. Tess was sitting at the edge of my bed, her laptop open, her prosecutor's mind working at a speed that made my head spin. Silas was on the phone in the hallway, his voice low and urgent, calling in every favor he had built in 30 years of medicine. We weren't just victims anymore. We were architects. "He filed the petition, Mom," Tess said, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Arthur is asking for an emergency hearing on Thursday. He's claiming you had a psychotic break and vanished from the station. He's got Clara ready to testify as a neutral auditor, claiming the mill is failing and needs his immediate control to save the employees." "He's playing his part perfectly," I whispered. "Let him play," Silas said, walking back into the room. He looked at me, a cold glint in his eyes that reminded me of the frozen Blackfoot River. "I've spent the last 48 hours with Detective Miller. We have more than just a theory now. We have a map." Many people think that power is found in bank accounts or business titles, but Silas taught me that real power is found in the unseen safety net we build through the years. Arthur thought he could freeze my accounts and leave me helpless. But he forgot about the people who don't care about money. He forgot about the boy I saved in the woods. He forgot that Tess was a Vance before she was a lawyer. "The silver coat, Mom," Tess whispered, reaching for the fabric. "The tracker coup inside. It didn't just show us where you were when Silas found you. It recorded the whole journey. We have every stop Arthur made. We have the exact coordinates of where he moved you from the waiting room to that cabin. We have the time-stamped proof that he was with you when he claimed to be looking for you in town." It was the perfect trap. Arthur was walking into that courtroom thinking he was the grieving, worried husband. He was going to stand before the judge and lie under oath. And while he was doing that, Sonia and the local police were already executing search warrants on Clara's city apartment and the lodge where they'd been meeting. "We let him talk first," Tess said, a fierce, predatory smile spreading across her face. "We let him commit perjury. We let him show the judge his forged medical reports and his fake Maria Sanchez leads. And then, Silas and I walk in with the digital map from your coat and the toxicologist's report from the hospital." "And me," I added, my voice like stone. "I'm not staying hidden in this bed." "Mom, you need rest." "I've had enough rest, Silas. Arthur tried to exo us me from the world. He tried to turn me into a ghost. On Thursday, that ghost is going to walk into the county courthouse and reclaim her throne." The plan was simple, but it was airtight. We were debt, a web of truth that was stronger than any lie Arthur could spin. While Julian was probably picking out a new suit for the hearing, and Arthur was practicing his concerned voice in the mirror, we were gathering the threads of their destruction. I realized then that this was the real descent of Eleanor Vance. It wasn't the wool, it wasn't the mill, and it was the loyalty of a daughter who never gave up, and the gratitude of a friend who waited 30 years to pay a debt. Arthur thought he was the master weaver, but he was just a moth trying to eat the tapestry. "Are we ready?" I asked, looking at them. "Ready," Tess said. "Ready," Silas echoed. The storm was coming to Montana, and this time Arthur Vance didn't have a coat thick enough to survive it. The Montana County Courthouse was a cold, gray fortress of marble and echoes that Thursday afternoon. I sat in a car outside, my fingers tracing the soft silver wool of my alpaca coat, while Tess and Silas prepared the ground. I could hear the wind whistling through the valley, a low morning sound that matched the tightness in my chest. 30 years. I had spent 30 years with a man who was, at that very moment, standing before a judge and claiming that I was a broken, nameless ghost. "Ready," Tess said, looking at her watch. "Ready," I replied. We entered through a side door. Sonia had cleared the way, ensuring no one would see us until the perfect moment. I stood in the small hallway behind the courtroom doors, listening to Arthur's voice. It was beautiful. It was polished. It was the voice of a man who had spent 3 decades practicing the art of the lie. "Your Honor," Arthur said, his voice cracking with a feigned, heavy grief, "my wife was the light of my life. Eleanor Vance wasn't just a business owner. She was the heartbeat of this valley, but the stress, the pressure of the mill, it was too much. She began to hallucinate. She began to wander. I did everything I could to protect her, but when she vanished from that station, I realized I had failed. Now, the Zhuang Det Vance is in chaos. 50 families are at risk of losing their livelihoods. I am asking for emergency control of her accounts and the mill's assets, not for myself, but to keep her legacy alive while we continue the search for the woman I love." I heard a soft, muffled sob from the gallery. He was so good at it. He was playing the role of the tragic widower while I was still breathing, still fighting, just 20 feet away. Beside him, Clara was sitting in the front row, wearing a modest black dress and dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She looked like the perfect neutral auditor, a grieving colleague just trying to do the right thing. The judge, a stern man who had known my family for years, looked down at Arthur with pity. "Mr. Vance, this is a terrible tragedy. The court is prepared to sign the order." Tess pushed open the double doors. The heavy oak hit the walls with a thunderous bang. "With all due respect, Your Honor, the court is being fed a story that is as thin as a moth-eaten blanket." The room went silent. Every head turned. Arthur froze, his pen hovering over the legal documents. Clara's handkerchief dropped to the floor. Tess walked down the aisle with the confidence of a predator, her heels clicking against the stone floor like a clock ticking down the seconds. "Tess Vance?" the judge asked, confused. "What is the meaning of this? This is a private hearing." "I am here as the prosecutor for the state, and more importantly, as the legal representative for the victim of a premeditated murder attempt. And Your Honor, she isn't missing." Tess stepped aside, and then I walked in. When I was wearing the silver alpaca coat, it shimmered under the courtroom lights, a masterpiece of Montana wool that made me look like I was carved from the mountain ice itself. I walked slowly, my head held high, my eyes fixed on my husband. Arthur's face went from pale to ghostly white. He gasped, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on the shore. He actually stumbled back, grabbing the table for support. "Eleanor? But you're sick. You're confused." "I have never been clearer, Arthur," I said. My voice was as cold as a Montana winter, echoing off the high ceilings. "I remember the lavender tea. I remember the copper taste of the poison you put in it. And I remember the way you whispered Maria Sanchez in my ear before you locked me in that cabin to die." "This is a setup," Arthur screamed, looking at the judge. "Oh, she's had a breakdown. She's imagining things." Tess didn't blink. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a digital tablet. "Many people ask, how could a woman be drugged on a train and still be found? How could we possibly know what happened in the dark?" Arthur thought he had erased his tracks, but he forgot that he was dealing with a weaver. Tess plugged the tablet into the courtroom screen. A map of Montana and Idaho appeared, covered in tiny, glowing blue dots. "This, Your Honor, is the digital record of my mother's silver coat. Before she left, I cue a military-grade GPS tracker into the lining of the fabric. Arthur thought he was taking her wallet and her ID, but he didn't realize he was datmut con moi que ganjin vinge ben kan mean." The dots began to move. Here is the station at 10 a.m. You can see the coordinates moving from the waiting room to the platform. And here, at 10:15 a.m., the tracker remains stationary in a private cabin for 20 minutes while the train is still at the station. This is the exact window when the conductor saw Arthur Vance exiting the train alone. But wait. Arthur told the police he was in town looking for her at that time. The tracker says he was on that train, siphoning her life away. The room erupted in murmurs. Clara tried to stand up, her eyes darting toward the exit, but Sonia was already standing there, her hand on her holster. "We also have the data from the auditor's computer," Tess continued, her voice rising in power. Clara wasn't auditing the mill. She was dead a web of fraud. When we have the logs showing $800,000 being moved from the Vance payroll into a gambling account in Arthur's name, authorized by Clara's digital signature. They didn't want Eleanor Vance to be missing. They wanted her to be Maria Sanchez so she could never ask where the money went. Clara collapsed into her seat, her face buried in her hands. The neutral auditor persona was gone, replaced by a terrified woman who knew the game was over. Arthur looked at the screen, then at me. His eyes filled with a desperate, animal fear. He realized that the masterpiece I had spent months making wasn't just a coat. It was his prison. Every stitch, every fiber had recorded his betrayal. "Arthur Vance," the judge said, his voice trembling with a contained fury. "You will step away from those documents immediately." Sonia walked forward, on the silver handcuffs glinting in her hand. The click of the metal sounded like the final clack of a loom finishing a rug. Arthur didn't even fight. He just stared at me as the police led him away. He wanted to give me a nameless grave, but I gave him a numbered cell. The empire I built was still mine. The family I raised was standing behind me, and as I watched them drag the men who tried to kill me out of that room, I realized that the threads of justice are the only ones that never break. 18 years. That was the judge's final word. 18 years in the Montana State Prison. Arthur didn't look at me when they let him out. The charm was gone. The polished manager's mask had finally cracked, revealing the hollow, terrified man underneath. He had tried to give me a nameless grave, but the state gave him a number instead. So Clara was sentenced too. 4 years as an accomplice. I heard she cried when the guards took her away, her mascara ruining that expensive auditor's suit she bought with my money. I felt nothing for them. Not anger, not hatred, just a cold, heavy silence. But Julian, my Julian. He was sitting in the same hallway where I had first seen him after the train. He looked smaller now, thinner. He was wearing the clothes of a man who still thought he was royalty, but his eyes were full of a shame that no silk suit could cover. Tess was standing next to me, her arms crossed, her eyes like flint. She wanted him in a cell right next to his father. She wanted him to pay for every lie he told, for every document he signed while I was drugged and dying in the dark. I walked over to him. He didn't look up at first, and he just stared at the marble floor, his hands fidgeting with his wedding ring, a ring I had bought for him. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was poison. I thought you were just moving away. I thought Dad said you needed a break. A break, Julian. You thought your mother would leave her life, her daughter, and her legacy without saying goodbye. You thought I would just vanish into the Idaho mountains and leave you the keys to the kingdom? I took a step closer, the silver alpaca coat shimmering in the dim hallway. No, you didn't think that. You just saw the new truck. You saw the condo in Missoula. You saw a life where you didn't have to work for anything because the woman who built it was finally gone. Julian started to sob then. Real, ugly sobs that echoed off the high courthouse walls. I messed up. I know I messed up. Please, don't let them take me to jail. I can't survive in there, Mom. I looked at my son. The boy I had protected from every cold wind Montana could throw at us. I had spent 30 years making sure he never felt the bite of poverty. I realized then that jail would be too easy for him. In jail, he would just sit in a cell and blame Arthur. He would play the victim. He would never learn what it means to be a Vance. "I'm not sending you to prison, Julian," I said, my voice turning to stone. Sonia and Tess have agreed to let me handle your rehabilitation, but you are no longer the vice president of Vance Weaving. As of this moment, you own nothing. The condo is being sold. The truck is being returned. Your bank accounts are frozen. What? But where will I go? You're going to the warehouse. Then starting Monday at 5 a.m., you report to the loading docks. You'll be carrying the raw wool bales from the trucks. You'll be sorting the greasy fibers by hand. You'll be cleaning the looms at the end of every shift, scraping the oil and the dust from the gears until your fingernails are black and your back feels like it's going to snap. You're going to learn what work is, Julian. I leaned down, making him look at me. You're going to live in the seasonal bunkhouse with the shearers. You'll eat what they eat. You'll earn minimum wage, and every cent of it will go toward paying back the money your father stole from the employees' pension fund. You're going to learn what sweat actually means. You're going to learn that a D-san isn't something you inherit. It's something you build with your own two hands, stitch by stitch. Mom, I can't do manual labor. My hands, your hands are soft, Julian, too soft. They've never known the bite of a cold morning or the weight of a hard day's work. That's my fault. I gave you a tuimbang thep and I forgot to teach you how to maintain the forge. But I'm fixing that now. I stood up and turned my back on him. If you miss a single shift, if I hear one word of complaint, Tess will file the conspiracy and perjury charges, and you will spend your next 5 years in a place much worse than a wool warehouse. Do you understand? Julian didn't answer for a long time. He just stared at his soft, clean hands, the tears dripping onto his lap. Finally, he gave a slow, defeated nod. I understand, Mom. I walked away then, flanked by Tess and Silas. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Justice had been served, but the cost was a mother's heart. I had saved my empire, but I had lost my son a long time ago. Now, I had to see if he was strong enough to be debt back together from the scraps of his own cowardice. The silver coat felt heavy as I stepped out into the Montana sun, but for the first time in 30 years, the weight was mine. And mine alone. Arthur wanted a missing person. Julian wanted an estate. I gave them both exactly what they deserved, a chance to feel the weight of their own choices. The sun was setting over the Thung Lung Tuyet that Friday evening, painting the Montana sky in shades of deep purple, bruised orange, and a gold so bright it looked like molten copper. I stood on the porch of the Vance Ranch, watching the light dance off the peaks of the mountains. 2 years. And it had been 2 years since I woke up on that frozen floor, a woman without a name. And yet, as I smelled the cedar wood burning in the fireplace and the rich aroma of eggplant lasagna wafting from the kitchen, I realized I had never felt more like myself. I walked back inside. The dining room was warm, filled with the soft glow of candles and the quiet hum of a house that was no longer haunted by secrets. Tess was there, her hair down, looking less like a prosecutor and more like the little girl who used to sit behind my loom and do her homework. And Silas was sitting in Arthur's old chair, but unlike Arthur, he didn't look like he was trying to own the room. He just looked like he belonged there. "The lasagna is ready, Mom," Tess said, a genuine smile softening her sharp features. "It smells perfect, honey," I replied, yet taking my seat. We ate slowly. The conversation was easy, drifting from the news at the Shuang Det to the medical cases Silas was handling upstate. We didn't talk about Arthur. We didn't need to. He was a shadow that had finally been chased away by the morning sun. But Julian was a different story. He wasn't at the table. He was 3 miles away in the seasonal bunkhouse, eating stew with the shearers after a 12-hour shift in the warehouse. "I saw him today, Mom," Tess whispered, her voice losing its edge. "Julian. I was at the warehouse to drop off some paperwork. He was carrying a 100-pound bale of wool. His face was covered in dust, and his hands, they're calloused. He didn't even see me. He was too busy teaching a new hire how to sort the greasy fibers. He told the kid, "My mom created this system. It's the only way to ensure the weave is perfect." I felt a sharp pang in my chest. A mother's heart is a strange thing. It can be broken into 1,000 pieces, and yet it still finds a way to beat for the person who broke it. "Is he okay, Tess?" "He's different, Mom. He's thinner. He looks tired. But for the first time in his life, he looks like he's actually standing on his own 2 feet. I nodded, my eyes stinging. I wasn't ready to invite him back to this table. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But I was glad he was learning the value of his own sweat. I was glad he was dead a new version of himself from the scraps of his old life. I picked up my glass of wine and stood up. Silas and Tess looked at me, their faces illuminated by the candlelight. "I want to make a toast," I said, my voice trembling but firm. Now, a little over 2 years ago, I was on a train to nowhere. I was supposed to be erased. I lost 30 years of a marriage that turned out to be a lie. I lost the image of the son I thought I had raised. I lost my innocence, the belief that the people we love will never hold the poison. I looked at Tess, then at Silas. But look at what I gained. I gained the certainty that my daughter is the bravest, most loyal soul I will ever know. I gained a second chance with a man who waited 40 years to tell me he loved me. And I gained the hope that family, even when it's broken, can try to dead itself back together. This is a toast to the Disan we choose, not just the one we're born with, to the people who Jin Vi into our lives when we're lost, and to the needle that always points home. To home, Tess echoed, her eyes wet. To you, Ellie, Silas said, taking my hand. We raised our glasses. The wine was cool, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the room. As I sat back down, I realized that Silas had been right all along. Power isn't in the money. It isn't in the boutiques or the fame. Real power is the unseen safety net we build through years of simple, honest kindness. I had saved a lost boy in the woods, and 30 years later, he had become the thread that kept my world from unraveling. I looked at Silas, at the man who had stayed by my side in that hospital room, who had given up his conferences and his quiet life to be my anchor. "I chose wrong the first time, Silas," I whispered, "but this time, I'm choosing right." 40 years of sure, Ellie, he replied, his brown eyes full of a light that Arthur never had. The storm had passed. The traitors were in cages. The weak were becoming strong. And as the last bit of Montana's sun vanished behind the peaks, I realized that you don't need a name quo into a coat to know who you are. You just need to look at the people sitting at your table. I was Eleanor Vance. I was a weaver. I was a mother. And for the first time in a very long time, I was finally free. Arthur wanted me to be Maria Sanchez. He wanted me to be nobody, but he forgot that in this valley, the mountains don't care about the name on your ID. They only care about the strength in your bones. I had survived the tea, the train, and the betrayal. And as I held Silas's hand under the Montana moonlight, I knew that my story wasn't ending. It was just starting its finest weave. I stood on the porch of the Vance Ranch one last time before the winter moon reached its peak, and the silver alpaca coat draped over my shoulders. It was no longer a shroud of a nameless woman, but a badge of honor. I looked out over the Thung Lung Tuyet, at the glowing lights of the mill that continued to hum, even after the storm. I've realized something. Through all of this, something that a 30-year marriage or a bank account couldn't teach me. Identity isn't found in a driver's license or a wedding ring. It's found in the threads you det into the hearts of others when the sun is still shining. Arthur tried to give me a nameless grave, but I gave him a numbered prison cell. He thought he was the master weaver, siphoning the life out of everything I built, but he forgot the most basic rule of the craft. You cannot build a lasting masterpiece with a rotten thread. He was a parasite, feeding on my success until there was nothing left but his own greed. And in the end, it was the very nobody he tried to create who stood up and reclaimed the throne. Clara thought she could buy a life with stolen funds, but she's scanning groceries in a supermarket now. Unrecognizable, just like she wanted me to be. To the women out there, the ones who are building your own empires, coordinating your own teams, and carrying the weight of your families on your shoulders, listen to me. Don't let your bio dung become a weapon for those who would do you harm. I thought I was being a good wife by ignoring the red lines. I thought I was being a good mother by paving my son's path with silver. I was wrong. I was building a Tuam Bangthep, but I forgot that steel needs to be forged in fire, not dipped in gold. And I raised a man who didn't know the value of sweat, and I almost paid for that mistake with my soul. But I also learned about the unseen safety net. Silas Thorne didn't find me because I was the queen of Montana wool. He found me because 30 years ago, I sat with a lost boy in the woods and gave him a reason to believe in home. Long taught is never a waste. It is a seed you plant in the dark, and you never know when it will grow into the only branch you can reach when you're falling into the abyss. Silas saved me twice, once as a doctor and once as the friend I should have never let go. And Tess, my fierce, loyal Tess. She taught me that the only people who truly know you are the ones who are willing to fight for you when you don't even know your own name. Julian is still at the warehouse. He's learning what it means to have black soot under his fingernails and a heavy ache in his back. He's dated a new version of himself from the scraps of his cowardice. I don't know if I can ever truly forgive him. I don't know if I can ever look at those hands and not see the signature on my death warrant. But I'm trying. One shift at a time, one day at a time. Because some things break and they don't glue back together. They have to be debt over from the very beginning. I thought I knew my husband. I thought I knew my son. But life showed me that you only truly know people when they have to choose a side. I've chosen mine. I've chosen the needle that always points home. I've chosen a man who waited 40 years for a kiss and a daughter who clue my survival into the fabric of my life. I'm dying to know how far my story is traveling. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and I want to ask you something. Something I struggle with every time I see my son at the warehouse. If you were Eleanor, if you were the mother who was betrayed by her own flesh and blood, would you give Julian a second chance? Or are some threads too broken to ever be mended? Tell me what you think, and if you've made it this far, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. I'm Eleanor Vance, and I'm finally home.